Alright, let's dive right into the fascinating world of paramotoring. It's a thrilling sport that requires both knowledge and skill. So it's essential to understand the basics before strapping on that motor and taking to the skies. First things first, let's talk about the equipment. The main elements of a paramotor setup are the wing, the motor, and the harness. The wing, also known as a paraglider, is a lightweight inflatable structure that provides lift. The motor, which you wear like a backpack, provides thrust to move you forward. And the harness is where you sit during flight. It's like your personal cockpit in the sky. Now, on to safety measures. In paramotoring, the right gear is crucial for staying safe. Helmets, gloves, and sturdy footwear are all must-haves. And don't forget about hearing protection. Those motors can get loud. Of course, knowing how to use your equipment is just as important as having it. That's why training with a professional is highly recommended before your first flight. But safety isn't just about equipment. It's also about understanding the physics of flight. You see, paramotoring works on the principles of lift, drag, thrust, and gravity. Lift is the upward force that gets you off the ground, created by the airflow over and under your wing. Gravity, as you probably know, is the downward force trying to bring you back down. Thrust is the forward force provided by your motor, which helps to create lift. Lastly, drag is the resistance you'll experience from the air as you move forward. By understanding and manipulating these forces, you can control your flight. So in a nutshell, mastering paramotoring requires a blend of understanding your equipment, prioritizing safety measures, and getting a handle on the basic principles of flight. It's not just about soaring through the sky. It's about doing it safely and skillfully. But trust me, once you get the hang of it, the sky really is your playground. Now, let's move on to setting up and maintaining your paramotor equipment. Then, let's move on to the nitty-gritty of setting up and maintaining your paramotor equipment. This is where we get hands-on, and trust me, it's just as exciting as the flight itself. Setting up your paramotor starts with inspecting your equipment. You'd want to check the wing, the lines, the motor, and the harness for any signs of wear or damage. If something seems off, it's better to address it now than thousands of feet up in the air. Next, you'll want to lay your wing out flat, with the leading edge facing into the wind. Make sure all the lines are untangled and that the risers are correctly connected to the harness. Now, remember, each wing is different, so it's crucial to be familiar with your specific model. Once your wing is properly laid out, it's time to strap into your motor. You'll want to do a pre-flight check on your motor. Check the fuel, the throttle, and the cage. Make sure everything is in working order before you even think about getting off the ground. Now, maintaining your paramotor equipment is a whole different ballgame. It's not just about keeping it clean, although that certainly helps. It's about regularly inspecting your equipment, replacing worn-out parts, and addressing potential issues before they become problems. The wing, for instance, should be kept dry and clean and stored in a cool, dark place to prevent UV damage. The motor, on the other hand, requires regular oil changes, air filter cleans, and spark plug checks. Your harnesses, straps, and buckles also need to be inspected for signs of wear. So, setting up and maintaining your paramotor isn't just a chore, it's a critical part of the sport. It ensures that your flights are not only exhilarating, but safe and efficient as well. After all, a well-maintained paramotor is a happy paramotor. Now, let's move on to mastering the skills of launching and landing a paramotor. Now that we've got our gear set up and ready, it's time to tackle one of the most vital skills in paramotoring, launching and landing. Don't worry, we've all been there, looking at that vast sky and wondering how the heck we're going to conquer it. Well, let's break it down. Launching a paramotor is a process that requires a bit of finesse. You've got your motor running, your wing is laid out behind you, and then you start to move forward, building up speed. As you do this, the wing will begin to rise, and it's essential to keep an eye on it as it does. Once your wing is overhead and stable, you continue to accelerate until you lift off the ground. Now, this might sound simple, but it takes practice to perfect. The key is to stay smooth and consistent and not to rush. Remember, we're not in a Hollywood action flick. Landing, on the other hand, is all about control and timing. As you approach your landing spot, you'll want to reduce your engine's power and begin a gentle descent. When you're about a few feet off the ground, apply a bit of brake to slow your forward speed and descend softly onto the ground. Think of it like parking your car, except your parking spot is the earth. In your car, well, it can fly. Now, weather conditions play a significant role in both launching and landing. Calm, steady winds are ideal. But what if the wind is gusty, or it's coming from a different direction? Well, different techniques come into play, such as reverse launching for windy conditions, or crosswind techniques for, you guessed it, crosswinds. Practicing in a variety of weather conditions under the supervision of an experienced instructor is the best way to become proficient at launching and landing. So don't be disheartened if you don't get it right immediately. With patience and practice, you'll soon be launching.
And landing like a pro.
So that's launching and landing in a nutshell. But remember, it's not enough to just get up and down. You need to navigate and control your flight too. But that's a topic for our next discussion. Okay, so we've launched, we're up in the sky, the world is beneath our feet. What next? Well, it's time to talk about navigating and controlling your paramotor in flight. Because let's face it, it's not just about getting up there. It's about staying up there and having a good time. Firstly, controlling your altitude, that's your height above the ground, is done using the throttle on your motor. To climb or ascend, you increase the power, and to descend, you decrease it. Turning, on the other hand, is accomplished by using the brake toggles attached to the trailing edge of your paraglider wing. If you want to turn left, you pull on the left brake, and to turn right, you pull on the right brake. Now, in flight, obstacles can present themselves in various forms, from physical barriers, like trees and buildings, to other air users, and even changes in weather. A good pilot is always aware of their surroundings and ready to react appropriately. For instance, if you're flying in a crowded airspace, you'll need to be constantly aware of other pilots and aircraft. You might need to adjust your course or altitude to avoid a collision. Similarly, if you notice that the weather is changing, say a sudden increase in wind speed or an approaching storm, you'll need to adjust your flight plan accordingly and potentially land sooner than expected. But remember, the key to successful navigation and control is remaining calm and collected. If you panic, you might make rash decisions that could put you in danger. So, always keep a cool head, even when things get a bit tricky. So there we have it, the basics of navigating and controlling your paramotor in flight. It might seem like a lot to take in, but with practice, these skills will become second nature. Now let's turn our attention to the rules and regulations of paramotoring. Now, we arrive at an essential aspect of paramotoring that's often overlooked by those new to the sport: understanding the rules and regulations. Yes, the sky might seem like a vast, unrestricted playground, but like any other sport or activity, there are rules to follow. Let's start with airspace restrictions. Not all parts of the sky are open for you to fly in. There are different types of airspace, and some are off limits to paramotors. For example, you can't fly over densely populated areas or near airports without special permission. Next up is flight planning. This involves understanding and anticipating the weather, knowing the local airspace restrictions, and planning your route accordingly. You should always have a clear idea of where you're going, the altitude you'll be flying at, and how long you'll be in the air before you even start your motor. And then there's communication with air traffic control. While paramotors are typically flown in uncontrolled airspace, where communication with air traffic control is not required, it's still a good idea to have a basic understanding of aviation radio communications. For instance, in some countries, you might need a license to fly a paramotor, while in others, you don't. So do your homework and make sure you're flying legally. So, while the rules and regulations might not be the most exciting part of paramotoring, they're crucial for keeping you and others safe. Remember, a good paramotor pilot is not just skilled in the air, but knowledgeable on the ground as well. That wraps up our talk on paramotoring. Trust me, it's a thrilling sport, and with the right knowledge and skills, the sky really is your playground. Happy flying!